Okay, I think I'm ready to get us started. So once again, welcome. For those of you I haven't met before, and I think there are a number of people I haven't met before, which is absolutely wonderful. No, you can't hear me. Okay, yeah. Huh. What about now? Is that better? Yeah, okay. So for those of you I haven't met before, hello. My name is Leah Middlebrook, and I am the director of the Oregon Humanities Center. And on behalf of the center, I would like to welcome you to the fourth and final lecture in our 2024-25 Reimagine season. Our events this year have highlighted the original human superpower, our mind's capacity to transform the world around us via imaginative thought. How might we use the power of the human imagination and reimagination to engage creatively and critically with the circumstances of our lives? What new insights and research questions will be uncovered in the reimagining process? And what new, more equitable and nourishing pathways can be forged? Deepa Iyer, our speaker today, addresses those questions via the Lorwin Lecture. The Lorwin Lectureship was created in 2009 with funding from the estate of Val and Madge Lorwin. Lectures by renowned scholars and experts promote greater appreciation for the importance of civil rights. The lectureship, overseen by the College of Arts and Sciences and the UO School of Law, is administered through research centers, including the Oregon Humanities Center, the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics, and the Center for the Study of Women and in Society. The OHC is honored and delighted that Deepa Iyer accepted our invitation to deliver the Lorwin this year. For one thing, when we first had the idea of structuring this year and these lectures around the theme of Reimagine, Deepa Iyer was the first person we talked to, and she actually helped us think about what this series could be. So it's especially nice to have you coming as our fourth speaker. I'll do more introduction of Deepa Iyer just momentarily, but first I did want to take one moment to publicly recognize one last time the tremendous contributions of the OHC staff to the Reimagine series. Associate Director Gina Turner, Program Coordinator Melissa Gustafson, Communications Coordinator Peg Gerhardt, and our two undergraduate student workers who have been such a great part of our team this year, Eleanor Hudson and Alicia Cherno. Thank you for the work and the care you have devoted to making this series such a success. We open our events with a land acknowledgement developed by our colleagues in Native American and Indigenous Studies and in consultation with the Grand Ronde and Siletz tribes. The University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and they continue to make important contributions to their communities, to the University of Oregon, and to the lands now known as Oregon, as well as to the world. In following the Indigenous Protocol of acknowledging the original people of the land we occupy, we also extend our respect to the 9 federally recognized Indigenous nations of Oregon, and we express our respect to the many more tribes who have ancestral connections to this territory, as well as to all displaced and Indigenous peoples who call this place, which we now call Oregon, home. We give this land acknowledgement to both publicly honor the longstanding and ongoing relationships Kalapuya and other Indigenous peoples maintain with their homelands, and to remind ourselves and our institutions of our responsibilities and obligations as the bearers of this history. You can find more information on our activities by perusing our website and looking through episodes of UO Today on YouTube and SoundCloud. Today, we are honored to welcome Deepa Iyer, a writer, strategist, and lawyer whose work is rooted in Asian American, South Asian, Muslim, and Arab communities, where she spent 15 years in policy advocacy and coalition building in the wake of the September 11th attacks and ensuing backlash. Chronicles of those communities formed the basis for her first book, We Too Sing America: South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh Immigrants Shape Our Multiracial Future. This was published by the New Press in 2015 and received an American Book Award in 2016. Currently, Deepa leads projects on solidarity and social movements at the Building Movement Project, a national nonprofit organization that catalyzes social change through research, strategic partnerships, and resources for movements and nonprofits. Previously, she held positions at Race Forward, a South Asian Americans Leading Together, the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center, and the Asian American Justice Center. She conducts workshops and trainings, uplifts narratives through the Solidarity Is This podcast, and facilitates solidarity strategy for cohorts and networks. Deepa is the author of a children's picture book, We Are the Builders, which was published in 2024, as well as the workbook you may be holding in your hands right now, Social Change Now, a guide for reflection and connection, which was published in 2022. The book introduces the social change ecosystems framework that informs the talk Deepa Iyer will share with us today, titled Reimagine, Our Social Change Ecosystems. Please join me in welcoming Deepa Iyer.
Thanks so much, Leah. Good job. Hello, everyone. It is so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming out. This is my first time in Oregon, and so I'm so glad to be here at the University of Oregon, and I want to thank Leah for that very kind introduction. I also want to thank the tremendous team at the Oregon Humanities Center, Gina, Peg, Melissa, and I've also had the opportunity to meet some students this afternoon, along with talking with Professor Ernesto Martinez's class. So thank you for all of the ways in which you have shown so much warmth to me as I am here. And I am so delighted to actually deliver the Lorwin Lecture. But before I dive into our topic, the Reimagine Our Social Change Ecosystems, I wanted to let you know that I'm not a typical lecturer, so there will be times during this talk where I will turn it over to you to think about a question or a reflection or share something with someone that you're sitting next to. So I want to warn you about that first. So before I talk about the actual ecosystem framework, I wanted to share with you a little bit about my points of entry into this work and where my roots lie. And that really starts with my own upbringing in Kerala, India, where I was born and raised till I was 12 years old. And at that point, my family moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And as you can likely imagine, we went through and endured a lot of experiences of displacement and dislocation, discrimination and isolation, and all of those experiences, like many immigrants, really shaped my interest in questions around belonging and exclusion and inclusion. And as I went on to college and law school, I really began to realize that for me, the antidote for that type of displacement was actually to be in community with like-minded people with similar experiences and values. And over the course of my legal and policy and nonprofit career, I have been shaped by many of the organizers and elders in certain movements, particularly those who respond to crises moments. Leah, in her introduction, mentioned the post 9/11 era that I have been part of changing. And I've also been working closely in the current moment with community organizations all over the country that are really trying to resist the current situation that we're in, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more as well. So all of those experiences really are the roots for what I'm going to be sharing with you in terms of the idea of social change ecosystems and how they can be helpful for us in doing our work to better our communities. So because I use the word social change a lot, I just wanted to give a little bit of grounding of what I mean when I use that word and that phrase. So those of us who are engaged in any sort of social change work know that we're really trying to reveal and expose what the root causes are of the inequities and injustices that we see. But we're not just revealing those, we are also building and offering a set of transformative systems, policies, and narratives. And we're doing that, hopefully, with resources, clarity of our roles and values, and sufficient partnerships and infrastructure. So this is what I mean when I think about what social change work is. And so with that in mind, some collective inquiries for us to keep in mind during this conversation. I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about what are the components of a thriving and robust ecosystem, and how do our society's current ecosystems function, and then how can we reimagine these ecosystems through a social change framework. So that's going to be the arc of our conversation. So I want to start to think about that first question by returning to nature. And the reason that I think that's important is because when we think of robust ecosystems in nature, we can really understand the characteristics that make them sustainable and that make them interdependent. So pick any type of natural ecosystem that comes to mind. Maybe it's a coral reef or the ocean or a rainforest. I was recently in Alaska, so for me, I think about the glacier lakes a lot. But as we think about the ways in which natural ecosystems function, these are just some of the characteristics that we know are important. There is a sense of interdependence, the ways in which organisms play roles that support others. So in a coral reef, for example, tiny algae use sunlight for photosynthesis to provide food for the coral, and in return, the coral provides algae with shelter and nutrients. We can find this across various ecosystems in nature. We also see adaptation and regeneration in rainforests, for example, where trees that fall to the ground begin a process for regeneration by creating a gap in the canopy and allowing sunlight to seep through to the forest floor, creating the possibility for new growth. And of course, diversity is critical in a natural ecosystem because it opens up opportunities for cohesion. The more species that can coexist, the less direct competition or collapse there will be in the ecosystem. I think about these two quotes a lot when I think about natural ecosystems. One is from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. In some native languages, the term for plants translates to, quote, those who take care of us, end quote. Suzanne Simard, who's a forest ecologist, has said, underground, there is a world of infinite biological pathways that connect trees and enable them to communicate. So our society, too, can be seen as a web of interconnected micro ecosystems. These are the spaces and places where we feel connected to each other, where we feel aligned around our vision of the world, and where we share collective values. These could be small micro ecosystems, such as organizations on a college campus, or a neighborhood mutual aid association, to a statewide network, and even a transnational social movement. And in many ways, our society's ecosystems, at least here in the United States, when they're functioning effectively, when they're embodying the characteristics of interdependence, diversity, and adaptation, can be safety nets for underserved and vulnerable communities. So thinking of food pantries or domestic violence shelters or a legal clinic. They can also be spaces for community care and connection. Thinking of public gathering places, libraries, university campuses. And they can be sites of curiosity and conscience. There's a picture on this slide here of a street marker that acknowledges our troubled history. And in this one, the Arch of Healing and Reconciliation in Bellingham, Washington, where in 1907, a group of residents targeted and attacked immigrant workers from India. Again, a site of conscience. But it is also vital to recognize and acknowledge that our micro ecosystems in society and democracy are in trouble in many ways. We are undergoing tremendous instability and chaos in many of our ecosystems. And as this slide shows, around the world and here in the United States, we are plagued by overlapping and unprecedented crises, from climate change to the attacks on the rights and bodies of people, to the genocide in Gaza. And these crises, of course, are not new. They have been brewing under the surface and neglected and dismissed for generations. Often we see glimpses of what is underneath. During the pandemic, for example, it became clear that our healthcare system is broken. During the 2020 uprisings that followed the murder of George Floyd, we realized that DEI needed to move beyond window dressing to also mean reparations and justice. The weight of these crises and the neglect of these underlying inequities has put tremendous pressure on our democracy as a whole. And adequately and effectively responding to them has become exceedingly difficult because the key values of a robust ecosystem, going back to nature, interdependence, collective care, cooperation, have been replaced by isolation, individualism, and competition. In fact, today, sociologists report that more Americans than ever live in civic deserts with little contact with one another, and thus fewer bonds. And this is even more dire in rural areas and among young people. What this means is that we aren't getting to know and learn to respect on each other in civic spaces, and we're increasingly becoming siloed and only connected to people who think like us, leaving little room for adaptation, diversity, or transformation. This is also reflected in the deep polarization that has rooted itself in our country. In fact, in 2024, Merriam-Webster made polarization its word of the year, given the number of word searches for that particular word by Americans. In the current environment, the ways in which ecosystems are being impacted is even more destabilizing. It would take hours for me to detail the impact, but I want to highlight a few that are relevant to this conversation. First are the attempts to erase and sideline ideas and frameworks that are crucial to a just and multiracial democracy. For example, the New York Times reported recently that certain words are being removed from federal agency websites and documents. Words like LGBTQ, racial justice, marginalized, and even, quote, a sense of belonging. These aren't just words, though. They represent a lexicon of values, our community histories, our aspirations to the type of society that we want to build. Next, the gutting of DEI programs, the growth of disinformation, along with attacks on academic freedom, are really shredding programs and practices that are intended to foster that adaptation and connection with each other. The withdrawal of federal funds for medical research and the humanities means that many of our ecosystems are having to make really hard decisions about their mission and their staff and their partnerships. Finally, as this is Asian American Heritage Month, I wanted to offer some ways in which Asian Americans are being impacted in the current climate from the standpoint of civil rights and civil liberties. We know that many immigrants, including Bhutanese refugees with legal status, have been targeted for immigration enforcement and finding themselves effectively stateless after being deported to third-party countries. We know that there are threats to birthright citizenship, which was actually enshrined in the Constitution after a Chinese cook in San Francisco named Wong King Ark filed a lawsuit in 1898. And we know that Asian American students, such as Dr. Badr Khansuri, an Indian scholar at Georgetown, are finding that their visas are revoked for engaging in Palestinian solidarity. Just to note, though, that this morning a federal court did order Dr. Khansuri's release from detention. Beyond these external dynamics that are roiling our country, many of our ecosystems are also facing pressure from the inside too. I often use this image of a pressure cooker on a very hot stove to reflect how it can feel within our micro ecosystems. Imagine that the burners are turned all the way up, and they represent different factors. Chronic crisis response with little time to reflect, evaluate, or rest. The culture of hyper-performance and productivity. Unhealed trauma. And the perpetual state of being under-resourced in the richest country in the world. It's not surprising then that many of us who are committed to social change can feel like some of the images on this slide. Sometimes it feels like we're on this seesaw, bouncing from numbness to outrage on a given day. Or we're playing a game of whack-a-mole, trying to address one crisis while two others pop up. At times, we feel like no matter what we do, we keep doing the same things over and over and attempting a different result. Or we feel like this wilting plant that we water and then wilt, water and wilt. So now I want to pause and actually turn it over to you. And I would love it if you could think a little bit about these images that are on the screen or the pressure cooker, and actually think a little bit about whether any of these images resonate with you and why. And maybe you could talk to someone next to you, and if you don't know them, you can also meet them because we're all about interconnected ecosystems here. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay? Go for it. I'm sorry.
It's okay, it's not your fault.
Okay, if you want to wrap up that last sentence that you're saying. Such a great group of folks. You listened to me. Okay, thank you. I would love to hear from two people in a brief description of any theme that came up in your conversation. Thank you.
The fracture of information systems.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Someone else.
Can you repeat comments just so we can?
The fracture of information systems, and which leads to disinformation and polarization. Yeah. Yes.
We kind of talked about empathy and burnout.
Okay. And the relationship between them, between empathy and burnout? Okay. Maybe one more person. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Yes, go ahead.
I was just mentioning, so I work at the university in a soft-funded institution and talking about the funding pressures of constantly having to find money to pay for the work that we're doing.
Right.
Means that we spend so much time and effort on that and not on doing the work well.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, we pay so much attention to funding and supporting the work that we are not spending enough time on actually doing the work or how we do the work. So thank you for indulging in that conversation. And if we had more time, we could get a little bit deeper into what these themes mean for our ecosystems as a whole. And recently, I have been using a metaphor of a fracture to describe this time that we're in right now. Just as a bone breaks in our body, the fractures in our body politic are revealing cracks and fissures and fault lines that have been there for some time. But under the onslaught of federal actions and executive orders that polarize our communities and deepen decades of neglect, our country seems like it can no longer bear the weight of it as it once did. And so there are obviously processes that are happening right now. I would say that right now we are in the process of rupture. We're facing the impact of pain and inflammation and even grief during a time of unraveling. And people and institutions are responding to this inflammation in different ways. Some of us are dealing with numbness and fogginess. Others are responding with clarity and solidarity. First responders are rushing to the many sites of trauma, borders, classrooms, nonprofits, college campuses, subway stops, courts, and more. They're scaffolding, messaging, and litigating to send signals to the entire country that something is amiss. But this process actually will move beyond rupture, right? And it's simultaneous when it comes to the importance of reckoning, of facing the truth, facing and recognizing the deep harms of broken systems through active acknowledgement. The process also includes reweaving, building new connections and solidarities, new narratives through active community-centered work. And it involves rooting, strategically planting different foundations, realigning our actions to our values, relying on our ancestral indigenous knowledge, reimagining, and grounding long-term belonging and transformation through active visioning. If this is a helpful metaphor, I want to offer you some questions to take away with you. If you're part of an organization, how has it been characterizing what is breaking right now? And how is it reacting and responding to the inflammation? What is being revealed to you about the rupture? What is being revealed about our national story as well? And what is possible? Because even in times of fractures and fault lines, there are opportunities and there are gifts. This is a time, for example, when we see more and more people raising their hands to support and volunteer and get involved. What are the on-ramps that we can build to get them in? We're also seeing courageous collaborations and actions around the country, such as when students and faculty members are protecting international students on campus, or people are going out to schools to prevent immigration enforcement from coming in. And we're also seeing new ideas emerging as well. Nonprofits are considering consolidations and mergers to be more effective in their work. All of these are crocuses peeking through heavy snow. As I mentioned, I was recently in Alaska, and I learned that crocuses often grow there during the winter, even in heavy snow. They need the cold to go through their growth process. And once the snow melts, it provides water to the thirsty roots. So I want to invite us all to think about the crocuses that we can be seeding during a time of fracture and rupture. So many of us are actually moving through this transformation right now, where we are trying to move from centering egos and logos to interdependence, moving from silos to choosing solidarities, moving from a lack of innovation and being stagnant to experimentation and energy, from a cycle of permanent crisis response to building long-term infrastructure, from saying no more Band-Aids to root causes of injustice to actually engaging in meaningful systems change that does not ignore and neglect what has been happening over generations. From that wilting plant, the burnout and disconnection, to nourishment, and from staying stuck to regeneration. I think many of us are on the arrow towards these other ways of being, towards reimagining transformation. How do we do that? Well, obviously, I don't have the answer for you, but I have a contribution with a lot of humility that I want to offer that really thinks about those characteristics of natural ecosystems and brings them into social change work. And that's really rooted in this framework called the Social Change Ecosystem Framework. It's something that I developed back in 2017, also during a time of overlapping crises that communities were facing. And this is a pretty easy visual to look at, but I promise that if you work with it, it can offer some insights and epiphanies, and it can help through that transformation that I think many of us are here to do. So the framework has 3 components to it, and it's detailed in the book a lot more, but I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to it. So the 3 components first are values, and those are indicated in the middle circle that looks like the sun. Those were my values when I put this together. You will have different ones. But the question here is, what do our words like equity, solidarity actually mean in real life and practice? What happens when we're misaligned with our values as people or institutions? And how do we keep coming back to our values as we engage in any sort of action or practice? The second part of this framework is an invitation to think about the roles that we can play as individuals or institutions in engaging in social change work. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. And then the third aspect of this framework is that it is indeed an ecosystem. It does not reflect the traditional Western hierarchical model of doing work. It instead invites us to think about solidarity and connections and interdependence so that we're working together in collaboration. So a few more characteristics about the framework for you to keep in mind. This is a multidimensional framework, and what I mean by that is that you can use it as an individual, you can use it as a department to map out the staff and their roles. You could use it as an institution with many components. You could even use it as a movement where organizations have looked at the members of a coalition and identified the different roles that they play. What it reveals to us is where there is stagnancy, redundancy, where we're replicating each other time and again, and where there isn't enough diversity. This framework is also assets-based. It really aligns with our skills, our strengths, our knowledge, our lived experiences, and it is contextual. And what I mean by that is that our roles can and should change depending on what is happening around us and what our ecosystem needs of us. And finally, this framework emphasizes sustainability and well-being. Often, when we feel like the wilting plant, we think that the only choice is to leave, to shut down, because we're burned out. This framework helps us think about what is another role that I can play in the ecosystem that will advance our shared values, instead of actually leaving it altogether. So now that I've kind of laid out a little bit about the model and the framework, I want to tell you about the roles. And as I do that, I want you to please reflect, if you would like to, on the roles that you often play in engaging in social change. And we'll have a chance to talk about that in a bit. So I want to start with weavers. So weavers are those of us who see connections. So we're able to understand, for example, that climate justice is connected to immigrant rights, that people in Oregon are connected to people in Washington, D.C., and we're able to make all of those connections happen. Experimenters are those of us who pioneer and invent. We don't want to stay stuck in the same old paradigms. We are reimagining a different way to tend to problems that we see in society. And we're able to course correct as needed. During the pandemic, many institutions and people ended up doing work that you can see as experimenters, reaching folks who are immunocompromised, making sure that we're able to connect digitally, right? All these different ways of engaging in social change work. Frontline responders, that's pretty obvious by the name. These are the individuals and organizations who are able to be on the ground when a crisis occurs. They know how to deal with chaos and bring calm to it. and they're able to marshal messages and ideas to community members that are directly affected. Visionaries are those of us who see the North Star. We know that there are alternative futures that we need to get to, and we're able to inspire and remind each other of our direction when we get lost. And like all of the roles in the map, they're interconnected, so visionaries cannot get us to that alternative future without builders. And builders are those of us who are creating the scaffolding between the North Star and our current reality. So we're the ones who have the spreadsheets, the programs, the delegation, and the resources in order to move towards a collective vision. Moving on to caregivers and healers, both caregivers and healers are concerned with communities of care, but a little bit differently. So caregivers are focused on the people that they interact with. That could be the students in my class. It could be the clients who come to my social service agency. It could be my colleagues. Healers are looking at a higher level at how it is important to tend to trauma that really winds itself through systems and practices, and they bring certain types of gifts like somatic healing or restorative justice circles to the community. Disruptors get into good and necessary trouble, like Representative Lewis asked us to. They shake up the status quo, they raise awareness, they build power, and often they do this in a way that might make others in the community feel uncomfortable. And this is the role that is really important for people with privilege of any kind to play, so that the burden of disruption doesn't always fall on the most marginalized communities. Storytellers. During a time when so many of our community histories are being rendered invisible or even banned, storytellers are those of us who are sharing those histories. They're capturing and preserving our cultures and our stories through all of these different mediums. And then finally, guides. So guides are those of us who have played another role on the framework, know it really well, and are able to mentor and guide others who are playing that role now. So these 10 roles, as you can see, are ones that probably many of us play simultaneously. But the questions here are, what are the ways in which playing a role impacts me? How does it serve the broader ecosystem? Who else is part of that ecosystem? How do I actually support them? When we get clarity on our roles and align with our shared values, we can actually move towards more effective and sustainable social change. Lots of different institutions and organizations and individuals have used this framework over the years and have found that it's a helpful entry point, whether we're just getting involved and don't know what to do, where to go, because we're so overwhelmed and we're on that seesaw, or even those of us who are veterans who feel like the wilting plant because we've done this work for a while to actually renew us a little bit. So I'm going to pause again and have you think about what roles do you most often play in advancing social change? And you can define social change how you want to. It could be community care, it could be equity, whatever it is that comes to you when you think of that phrase. So I'm going to give you a minute to, again, think about it and have a conversation with the person next to you, and then we'll come back. And then I'm going to close and answer any questions that you might have. Okay, go for it. All right, time to wrap up that last sentence or phrase. Thank you so much for having that conversation. Thank you. I'd love to hear about your roles in the Q&A if there were some questions that came up for you, but I hope that that was a little bit of a teaser to what you'll find in the book, which again, thank you to the Oregon Humanities Center for making copies available to everyone. But there are prompts, there are a lot of reflection questions that you can dig into if you find this to be useful. So this framework, and I'm returning back to the very beginning when we talked about the characteristics of ecosystems that are robust and interdependent in nature. This framework tries to embody some of those. So in this, we will find interdependence because, as I mentioned, each role supports another one. For example, caregivers are vital to supporting frontline responders and disruptors. It also embodies adaptation and regeneration. It allows us to not get stagnant and stuck. It enables us to switch our roles to maintain our sustainability. It embodies mutual reciprocity, as when we need, for example, guides to support us in our roles. And diversity. When we map out our coalition, our community, our networks, we can identify where there's duplication, where there's redundancy, or how we might want to add new partners into our ecosystem to flesh it out more. So some takeaway reflections that you might want to take with you. What roles, if I'm part of an organization, what roles does my organization play to advance its values? In this moment, do roles need to shift and change given the fracturing of ecosystems? And who else is part of your broader ecosystem, even as an individual? How can you strengthen those connections and partnerships? So when we started, we had these 3 collective inquiries: the elements of a thriving and robust ecosystem, the ways in which currently our society's ecosystems are functioning, and how can we reimagine those ecosystems during a time of rupture and fracture through a framework that really embodies social change. I hope that this was helpful. I think it's really important that we not just talk about the problems, but we also think about practices and solutions that can help us transform. And you can feel free to use this framework as an individual, as you think about your roles in this moment. You can think about it to identify the supports that you might need from others in your ecosystem. You can use it when you're overwhelmed or confused. And if you're part of an organization, you can utilize it to map the roles of your staff or your team, and you can use it to organize projects or campaigns, and even influence a broader institution like a university or philanthropy or a large sector as well. So with that, I'm going to close. This is where you can find more information about my work and where you can connect with me. I would love to hear any questions or feedback or insights that came up for you during this conversation. I want to thank you for being part of the reimagining, and I want to thank the Oregon Humanities Center again for having me. Thank you.
Are you willing to entertain some questions?
Yes, I love that.
I have a microphone here. I can come to you as questions and ideas come. Just raise your hand and I'll scoot back and get you.
Would you be able to give any insight into, like, I've been thinking about how I see myself in roles and how I see other people in roles, and could you talk a little bit about how we see ourselves versus how we see other people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think that that's one way we can use this framework to really think about how others perceive us. Because I've used this framework in different situations where a coworker or a colleague or a friend will say, I really see you as a caregiver, and the person might be like, I never thought of that. And so there's an opportunity to mirror back to someone what they don't see in themselves. And there's also the opportunity to then, for ourselves, to think about, okay, what does it mean to actually accept that I play that role? And how can I be more public about it or more grateful for playing that role? So it's a great way to connect with other people to ask that additional question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I had one thought about, and I was wondering if you could maybe speak to the ways in which some of those roles in organizations can sometimes be gendered. Mm-hmm. And just to give one context, like sometimes mentorship here at the UO, certain kinds of mentorship, intimate mentorship, taking care of the whole person, can land on particular people who've been gendered in certain ways, mm-hmm. and that skill set, people just say, I just don't have that skill set. But then when we think about it a little globally, we're like, it's the women who are doing this.
Right.
Or the queer folks or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, it seemed that one solution that your framework gives is that these are skill sets that can be kind of, it gives you an opportunity to name them.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if you've ever had to be able to use it to think about the way in which things get gendered
Yes.
in terms of labor.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Professor Martinez. So oftentimes when I use this a lot in like trainings and workshops, and we'll find that it's women of color, and queer folks who often say, I'm the caregiver or I'm the guide. And in many ways, in some cases, that can be an intervention moment. So one particular organization I was working with, it turned out when we mapped the staff that the executive director and the senior leaders, who are all male, cis male, identified themselves as visionaries, right, and experimenters, like those visible roles. And the women of color and the queer folks in the organization identified themselves as caregivers, like really supporting the ecosystem. But what that allowed us to do as facilitators was to say, okay, well, let's look at this a little bit deeper, right? And so thankfully, the organization's leadership was really open to that. And that started a process for them in actually thinking about how do they mentor and steer people into the roles of visionaries, right? And experimenters, if they are interested in that. How do they recognize the gender implications within the organization and have a conversation to unpack them? So that's the transformative moment can sometimes come, but you have to be open to it. And I think that this does allow for some of those interventions to happen that can change the organizational workplace altogether. Thank you.
Hank, I need your help with that.
Question back here.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you have any advice or suggestions about how to make space for doing this kind of work within an organization. And the context I'm thinking about is like in quote unquote normal times, we're very busy and we don't make time for it. And now we're in like crisis time because the funding is being pulled and we're trying to make hard decisions. And so it feels even harder to make space. Mm-hmm. And yet maybe it is really important to slow down in those moments too. So just wondering your thoughts around navigating, making space for this.
Yeah. I mean, generally, I think we work in urgency culture, and some of it is real and some of it is manufactured. And, you know, I always say, like, how we do the work is just as important as what the work is. And so it does take some level of slowing down. It does take some level of introspection and self-awareness as an organization even to say, okay, let's just pause instead of being reactionary consistently, right? And being that crisis responder and playing that whack-a-mole game. What would it mean to actually pause to think about our organization's roles in the past, what we might aspire to be, what is needed of us, what is required of us in our ecosystem and from our communities. And this doesn't take that long, right? This is a very intuitive framework, like you all responded to it very quickly. I have a children's picture book on it, and those kids respond to it like this too, right? And so it is possible to do this at a staff retreat, at a staff meeting. It takes a brown bag lunch. It takes probably like an hour and a half tops. But I think the key is that once we map and understand, we have to actually put some things into place. So it's not just a tool to kind of be aware of the roles, but it's the next step, which is, and some of those are in the book too, what does this awareness about our roles mean for our organization? How are we going to shift in terms of our practices, our programs, our campaigns, our staffing, our hiring, right? So that step also has to occur in order for it to actually wind itself through the ways in which we do our work. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'm kind of curious, and I want to discount this question by saying that I think local community like work is definitely the most fulfilling and least prone to burnout out of kind of all of this kind of existential and idea discussion. I noticed in your slides that one of your images was from Substack, which claims to be an economic engine for culture. I'm curious because it's something I've been thinking a lot about how even this entire discussion is framed in capitalism, and not to dive too deep into kind of previously theorized topics like Marxism and such, are we being too close-minded, and how do we leverage community-based change nationwide?
Wow. Do we have like a couple of hours to talk through that question? So, I mean, honestly, I do think it comes back to what you said first. The change that we need to start doing is very local. It has to be like neighborhood-based, locally based. And I would say, in addition to that, one of the ways in which we trip ourselves up often in doing social change work is we assume that all of us share the same values. We assume that all of us understand each other, that we're all on the same page. And we don't actually take the time to delve into that. So like your question around even in the nonprofit sector, which relies on a corporate model, which is in many ways over-professionalized. And that's why we're seeing so many of the pressure cooker that I had, right? That's why we're seeing so many of those implosions happening within the nonprofit sector, because it relies on that model. But we're not having those kinds of conversations. And I think in times of crisis and fracturing, as the person in the back said, we're less prone to doing that. So part of this is to slow down and to pause and to take some time to do the reckoning, to take some time to figure out how we do things differently. And local experiments, I think, are the way to begin.
It seems to me that your ecosystem leaves out those people doing social change work who want to be king of the jungle. And they want disruptors like me to just shut up.
It is on purpose that those kings of the jungle are not there, because I really believe that we need to come up with a different model. And in many ways, the reason that it is like a circle is because I wanted to make sure that we reflect indigenous and ancestral ways of learning and being with each other, rather than that typical hierarchy of the hierarchical leadership structures that we have, where there is a king on the top, and then everyone else is kind of trying to do the little crumbs and the band-aids to change things. So that is on purpose that it is like that. But It doesn't neglect the fact that we're living in systems where there is undue power in some and not others, where there is capitalism and extraction happening. It's all kind of something that we have to reckon with in order to do this work in a different way. But I do believe, and I see this all the time in my work on solidarity, that there are organizations and community members all around this country who are actually seeding different experiments to reimagine their work differently. I just don't think we hear enough of it, but I do think it's happening. You're doing it, sounds like, and I think many others are doing it in different parts of the country too. We just need more replication of those.
Okay. Hi. I was just wondering about the functionality of the model, and have you noticed, or what have you noticed about when people move between different roles? Is there like challenges, or is it more like positive and like transformative, or what have you seen?
Yeah, thank you for that. The question was around moving between roles. Yes, and that I think that it's important that we don't stay stuck in one. A lot of times there's a lot of privilege and power that comes with embodying and occupying certain roles. For example, the role of like the visionary, which is sometimes seen as the charismatic leader who tells us what to do, right, and where to go. That comes with a lot of power and privilege and positionality. And so part of this framework is the opportunity to be more aware of where we're taking up too much space, where we can mentor others to actually play roles, where we can get out of the way and not take over a particular space for years and years and years, right? And when people, make those shifts and say, okay, I think that in this season of work, I'm going to actually not be the visionary, but I'm going to be the storyteller. When that kind of shift happens, the entire ecosystem can feel more supported because there's opportunity then to flow in and out. But a lot of that is about, when I've worked with communities, a lot of that is about some level of, as I mentioned earlier, openness to actually understanding that the systems we're in right now are not working. And we need to actually be open to that kind of fluidity and movement. I think without that readiness and openness, it doesn't actually become transformative. Thank you.
I'm wondering if you could speak to your thoughts on how you see leadership emerge from many different types of roles. You mentioned sort of the charismatic leader, so what other opportunities across roles do you see leadership? And maybe speak to that tension between everyone's in charge and maybe no one's in charge.
Right, yeah. So one of the things I want to make clear is that this framework doesn't mean that we don't have people making decisions, right? That, right now we're in environments, even in the nonprofit world or in academia, wherever, where there are some people making decisions. But what this framework could allow us to do, if we use it, is that everyone has a voice, everyone has an opinion, everyone has something to share that's valuable, and instead of shutting people out, it brings them into circle and community. The other thing I wanted to mention related to your question is that there are some roles that don't often show up, and I wanted to uplift that. So in a lot of ecosystems, the roles that don't show up are experimenter, which I always think is kind of interesting because we're doing social change work often because we see something wrong and we want to change it, right? But that particular role, folks hardly say that they are experimenters, and organizations rarely take that role on. And the second is the healer, which is also interesting because we're mired in conflict, we're mired in polarization within our organizations or between communities, and that particular role is often missing in a lot of community ecosystems. So I always encourage folks to think about how to integrate healers and experimenters in our ecosystem so that we're not just relying on disruptors and frontline responders and visionaries, which are the three that often show up the most. So thinking about how to, again, what would happen if we diversify our ecosystems and more people step into those roles? Could we actually get to that interdependence that we would like to? Thank you. Okay. One more?
Sure.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about like the on-ramps to social movements, and I'm just curious if you talk more about maybe how to create those on-ramps, especially during a political climate and time when people feel so afraid or disempowered. So how to kind of meet people where they're at and create on-ramps for more people to get involved in this work, so it's the burden is shared among like a larger group.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so I think that, with social movements, oftentimes we see this big response to a movement moment or something horrible that happens where people are out on the streets, they're posting about it online, we're having conversations about it, right? So thinking about the uprisings in 2020 or Palestinian solidarity rallies that we saw, and those are opportunities that indicate to us that more people are aware of the root causes and more people are ready to step in and say, no more, or I want to be involved, or I care about this. But I think with social movements, what is hard is how we keep those people engaged. And that is, how do we continue to organize people? How do we bring them into community-based organizations so that they feel like they have a political and community home? I think that is the real struggle that a lot of social movements face. Why? Because they're under-resourced. They're on that pressure cooker, and they don't have the infrastructure to bring in like volunteers and board members and any of these other roles that I mentioned either. So part of it is to create infrastructure for local community-based organizations to actually bring in more people into their work. And that in some cases looks like organizing in neighborhoods, it looks like mutual aid associations, it looks like know your rights education, it looks like even community gatherings that are based on getting to know one another. But that kind of infrastructure is something that, at least from my vantage point, working at an organization that supports others, that we see less and less of. And I mentioned those civic deserts. That's another example. We just don't have enough of those spaces that are getting people in beyond the big movement moments. And I think that's something that we're going to also have to work on in terms of our ecosystem infrastructure. It's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the time you spent with us today.